So we're still here in the wonderful, beautiful and heavily armored Deutsches Panzermuseum Munster, the tank museum. This time with the director, Ralf Raths, and the same question that I already asked one of our other guests. Oh, well, we are the guest, but still. What is, in your opinion, the major misconception about tanks in video games?
Oh, as a rule of thumb, that it can be operated by one person.
Yeah,
that's the thing. I mean, there are exceptions. Red Orchestra was great, making teams, and you have things like Battlefield where you get at least bonuses when you operate a tank with multiple persons. I think in 3 or 4 it was this way, but mainly in every game where you can enter a tank, normally the player is able to steer it, to fight with it alone. And that's the main misconception, because every tank at its core is a team effort, always. And every single member has to do his job and they have to function together. And that's a big, big challenge. And it's completely not in the games normally. If it's in there, like in Red Orchestra, and you have a good team, you really feel it how everything clicks together and how it makes the tank work. That's one of the things where I said you can really learn from computer games, this special example. But other than that, I can't, out of my hand, think of another example where nearly it was shown in this good way. So that's the biggest misconception here.
Yeah, that's something I noticed, for example, my situational awareness in such games is horrible, even with the capabilities you have. So in War Thunder, I'm usually dying when in a tank. And for example, there's a newer game, Postscriptum, that models that pretty nicely with multiple crew members on the tank. And it works better with the crew. Yeah,
I tried it, but the beta ran abysmal on my system, so I have to wait for the final product. Yes, but I remember I was thinking of Red Orchestra when I saw it, and it looked very good. But let's see how it works. I mean, the main problem for the game designers maybe, if you allow a tank to be really mighty, if the crew works well, how far does the balance get unhinged in this moment? Should you give the people credit and say, okay, you're working well together, so you dominate the whole field because you're working good, and frustrate 30 other players? I think that's one point. But mentioning War Thunder, that's another thing. If you're moving to the MMO version of tank warfare, the main problem is that it's bloodless and people-less, and that the tanks are all working on their own. I mean, depending if you're playing Armored Warfare, War Thunder, or World of Tanks, there may or may be not artillery involved, but the artillery, of course, is more like a long-range tank again. So what's completely absent is combined arms warfare. The tanks are rolling around. There's no infantry support there. Of course, it's not needed for the system, but it makes the impression to the user that on a real battlefield also, there is no infantry needed, there's no reconnaissance needed, there's no aerial support needed, there's no artillery needed. And that's the wrongest picture you can have of armored warfare in actual reality, because in German there's this saying in the military that combined arms warfare is like a big orchestra. Every instrument has to play together to make the symphony. It's maybe a bit of a positive image, but you get the gist. It has to, every part has to be there and work together to make everything roll. The tank maybe or maybe not, if you're from another branch, but it may be the core of the thing, but it needs everything else too. And that's the second biggest misconception, the tank working alone on the battlefield. I think,
Now, you have games, strategical or tactical games, I would rather say, like, I don't know, Company of Heroes series or
tactical,
the war games. And there is the only thing that's representing the crew when we stay with this is veterancy. And I don't think that a crew can actually gain its experience that quickly in one single battle to work that much better. Do you think so?
Oh, hard to say. I would guess that training is the more important factor. I think that the training you bring into the battlefield for the first time is the deciding factor. In martial arts, there's the idea, if everything works perfectly when you're in a real fight, maybe you can live up to your training. So the higher your standard is, the higher you get. But normally you don't reach your training level. It's the same here. If you get a proper and solid training, you have a good chance to survive. Everything works. You gain confidence. You learn stuff. But learning new tricks, if your training is good, is not the key point. The point is gaining confidence, gaining calmness. Depending on that, situational awareness again. When you're calm, you see more stuff, you hear more stuff. But you have to have the proper training as a fundament of a basis in the first place to build on that. I'm not sure how you could quantify how much bricks you can add on top, because at some point you have the other phenomenon of really experienced veterans breaking down again. There is a graph, you can see it, for example, in David Grossman's book about on killing, where you see you gain confidence, you gain experience, and at some point you burn out. You see that at D-Day landing, the most experienced units are not performing best. Neither do the rookies.
Yeah.
Best do the medium experienced, not yet burned out units, with some experience under their belts, but not at the point where they're really at the end of the performance. So I think that's, you can, after the first contact, add some bricks. Then you can hold on to stay in the picture, till your bricks start to crumble again, and then that's it. So maybe this would be a game mechanism to consider, that units even can burn out. There's no negativity in veterancy normally.
Yeah.
You just add stars and points and skills, but there's no point where they say, okay, at this point they are just. It's always seen as a positive thing that the core personnel is there, but the core personnel at some point is just dead tired. And then you have talisman and totem mechanisms. People start to think, okay, I have my lucky socks on, and I will survive the landing, and they perform well. But if they don't have the lucky socks, they have this self-fulfilling prophecy, and this amounts over the months if you have much of this going on. So now we're getting on battlefield psychology, but maybe that's something for the game designers, that to at some point to reverse the mechanism.
Would you say that the moral of the unit plays into this? So you have veterans that have survived multiple years, for example, in the D-Day theater, maybe some even from Africa for the Americans, for the Brits from also the North Africa campaigns, and for the Germans from the Eastern Front. Would you say that a certain amount of inexperience could help with their moral?
Yes, indeed. It could, because at some point you have this veteran thing of, okay, I made it this far. Each day makes it more improbable that I survive, because it has to end. I just have so many days under my belt to use. At some point I will die. And so at some point the morale sinks, because it's just, to say it with Henry V, once more onto the breach, and then as a reward to just get the next breach and the next breach. So yes, the morale will sink at some point, definitely.
So the games that actually depict this aspect that is rather important in World War II are pretty. I can only think of the Company of Heroes series actually, where they just run back when they're low on morale and they don't hit anything anymore. Now, how would you say this? You said earlier that the problem is that the crew of the tanks is not displayed. Now, in such games, it is in a certain way, but not the morale of the crew of the tank. Now, infantry is clear. At some point, they have to run, or they just stick their heads low into the dirt and don't come back up again. But for a tank crew, what influence can morale have on them? Because fleeing is not really an option, is it?
It is, in a hidden way. One kind of battlefield psychology is that if you are not decided enough to just say, I don't obey the order, I revolt, I run away. If you don't do this, you can cut the edges. For example, you fall, when you run for an attack, you fall earlier to the ground and shoot. You stay behind cover, you don't run in the first line, stuff like that. Tanks can do the same things. The only question is, how open is it discussed in the tank? And there you are, talking about morale, veterancy, and working together as a crew. So it works like this. A tank is basically like a cauldron for the crew inside. Every vehicle is. U-boat crews work the same, bomber crews work the same, on some level ship crews, but they are big. If you look at crews that are roughly the size of a primary group, 5 to 10 people, maybe a little bit more on bigger submarines. They have dynamic mechanics between them, psychologically, socially, and their relationship to each other will change over the time. For example, strict obedience will decrease the more you know each other. If you see your commander shit in a bucket every day, you may like him more, but the ingrained respect goes down a little bit. So it changes, but this opens new doors. For example, you have a tank crew, and they know this won't go well. The complete operation we are in won't go well. We don't want to be in the first line because we know there are anti-tank guns, and we know there will be artillery. So what do? We have 2 ways. One is directly to the front, and one is a sensible but more defensive position behind this hill. Let's stick with the sensible. Right, commander? Yes, gunner. Or yes, driver, or whatever. So you can talk openly about it. You say, fuck this, we don't going. Or you can make the discussion the way that everybody knows what we're talking about and nod, and then calmly take the options that are more defensive, more life-saving. And that's what I said, you can flee hidden. Yeah. So, yeah.
So pretty much you take a more defensive approach overall.
Whatever, yeah.
For everything.
Or you better stop to check this strange noise from the motor that just you 5 here. So you know we all know these little lies, the social lies we all somehow agree on without really stating it. And the same works in the tank. As I said, if the crew is experienced and worked together for years, they are openly or not openly more able to find this kind of consensus.
Well, all right.
Okay.
In this case, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For this interview. And if you wanted to, please take a look at the Panzer Museum as long as it is in this state. Which
and then again after modernization.
Exactly. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this, and see you on the next video.
Bye-bye.